Good evening, everyone. We're going to take a couple minutes to let folks jump on, and then we'll make our way through the presentation. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Megan West. I'm the Federal Policy Coordinator for the agency, and I've been working with Ron Warren and Corey throughout this process from last year on CARES funding for the state. And so we're just going to talk about what's happening, give you all a status update on the first round of funds, as well as move into the development of the spend plan for the second round. So a little logistics before we start. Attendees will be muted until the Q&A portion of the webinar. Please use the raise your hand function to ask a question. If on the computer or Zoom app, you can access that raise your hand function by hovering over your face or name on the list of participants, or through the control panel at the bottom of the screen. Additionally, if you're on the phone, you can dial *9 and wait to hear that you have been unmuted. You also may need to dial *6 to unmute yourself. So that was *9 to wait until you have been muted, and then *6 to unmute yourself once you're led into the room. So please use the Q&A function only if you need help with technical challenges. Staff will be taking questions verbally from participants with raised hands, and then we have 7:30 p.m. tonight for questions. And if we do not get to your questions, we have some information at the bottom that we'll be posting at the end of the presentation for you all to look at and be able to write down and submit your questions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Fish Policy Director, Ron Warren.
Thank you, Megan. And can I have a sound check? I went to headphones.
You're working.
Perfect. Thanks, Megan. Okay. My slideshow is not working. Okay. So again, as Megan said, thank you very much for jumping on with us tonight. Just hoping to be able to walk through a few details. A little bit of a status update on round one and where we are, where the application review process is, a little bit of a background check, and then spend plan development process for round two, some key details of that spend plan, and then hopefully the majority of our time spent answering questions for everyone here who we're trying to serve and get this money out to, both from round one and secure round two. as we go forward. So please *9 if you're on a phone to raise your hand, *6 to unmute yourself once you're in the room. Those that are on Zoom, again, it's pretty straightforward. I hope everybody's Zoom proficient after a year and almost a half of going through different meeting forums like this. So again, the same slide that welcomed you and some of the technical information to follow during the meeting. So what's the status of round one? So we spent a bunch of different time, certainly took us longer than we had projected or targeted, but we went back and forth with NOAA Fisheries and finally had an approved spend plan in early January, mid-January of this year. And we had quite a bit going on relative to different deadlines. We had extended our application deadline for those who were Washington residents, but fishing the Alaska fisheries as everything opened up. We have been working closely with the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission staff. They are currently reviewing applications and working with applicants to make corrections or modifications to make sure that they're eligible applicants and that they're in the pool for round one. All applications must be compiled, so they do the crosswalk, make sure everybody's in prior to any fund distribution. And then we've identified some major issues, causes for some of the delays along the way. Quite a high number of incomplete or inaccurate applications, and we're working through those. Pacific States is working through those diligently. And for Washington residents who applied to the Alaska spend plan, should have applied to us if you're a Washington resident. So if you wrote down an Alaska or applied to Alaska but are not a resident there, I'd be checking in and certainly seeing if you're in, if they already corrected it, or how to make that adjustment for round two. And then we've had a bunch of coastwide conversations, coastwide meaning with Pacific States and the West Coast states on the residency issue and how to write that so one, NOAA is comfortable with the language that's there, it's reproducible, and it's broadly interpreted so that we're encompassing as many applicants as we can. Keep having problems. So a little bit of round two background. So round two, again, is in response to COVID-19 and the impacts to the commercial fishing and seafood industries in the US. Congress appropriated another $300 million for coastal states at the level of $255 million. The Great Lakes got 15 million, federally recognized tribes got 30 million. And again, we were very fortunate to be in the category with Alaska as the states, the two states that received the highest allocations for funding at 40 million each. For Washington, that's for commercial fishers, shellfish growers, charter boat owners, and processors. So other criteria that is in the documentation or the requirements for NOAA for spend plans, that you have to be a Washington-based business, that you have to have incurred indirect or direct losses resulting from COVID-19. Applicants have to self-certify an affidavit that makes them subject to a federal audit. That puts the burden on them or all of you. And then the state cannot pre-qualify applicants, but what we can do is if you need data to support your claim or have questions, please get a hold of us. We're doing our best when it gets busy to get back to everybody in a timely manner. Applicants must show gross revenue this go round from August through December of 2020 and a greater than 35% loss based off their 2015 to 2019 revenue averages. So the exception is for those without a 5-year history. We have spend plan language that allows for the inclusion of as many possible people in a fair and equitable way as we can. And there's a way that you can work towards validating business. We can validate business size or business structure to try to find a surrogate for you to be able to apply. And I might add, Corey and Megan, if I misstate anything, please interrupt so that we get it corrected right away. I don't want to let it go on if I've misspoken on any of the facts that we put out here. And then section 12005 was the section that's referred to in this round of fisheries assistance, but was from the CARES Act in round 1, and continue the provisions that that the applicants cannot be made more than whole, and that all applicants be at least 18 years of age. So Washington spend plan, where are we in the spend plan? The update for plan from round 1 was developed by Governor Inslee's office with assistance of the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Commerce, and in coordination with our sister agencies in Oregon and Alaska. Those were critical steps, and certainly appreciate the time and the graciousness to have continued conversations that Alaska and Oregon provided for us. Hope that we can do the same in the future. That the spend plan will reflect some of the lessons learned, and we'll get into some of those. That the $40 million that is eligible for Washington will be split between eligible sectors. Washington-based fishers who fish in Alaska are eligible. So that's a really important factor that gets back to a point I'm sure I'll say a couple of times, that if you are a Washington resident and fish under a license in Alaska, you apply to us. And we're trying to clear up that language of residency so that there isn't a misinterpretation. That fishery participants must include all revenues regardless of whether you land fish. So if COVID prevented you from fishing or conducting business the way you had, you still have to count all your revenues. It's not just normal fishing revenue or the lack of fishing revenue that you have to declare in the request of the indirect or direct COVID related losses. That the eligible sectors are charter, aquaculture, seafood sectors, processors, buyers, wholesalers. Unfortunately, the revenue losses from freshwater fisheries activities of food fish and game fish and retail sales will again not be included. The time frame again is August 1 through the end of December of 2020, and applicants can choose a smaller window than that, just like in the round one, as long as that period is at least a 28-day period. So distribution methodology, the distribution, sorry. Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties on my end. I've got a screen. How frustrating is that? So the total amount and the mix of claims is unknown. So we weren't able to forecast that. That's both in round one and in round two. The state expects that the total amount of the claims will again exceed the total available funding to the Washington Spend Plan. If the claims exceed the total available funds will be distributed using a two-step approach. So first is the prescribed marginal adjustment. Applicants will not have to make that calculation. That calculation will be made by using the information you provide by the folks at Pacific States, and then they'll proceed. If they have questions about your application, they'll reach out to you and make those adjustments. If the total claims is still over the total funding amount after the marginal rate reduction, then all disbursements will be reduced proportionally to the shortfall. So everybody will still receive funds based on their proportional value. So some of the lessons that we've learned thus far, we obviously saw that from the extension that we put in place for the application process that all of you or many of you may have needed a longer application period. We'd really like to hear what that length of time might be for you, what you see as the best time for the businesses that you're operating, that we clearly establish residency parameters consistent with other state definitions. We truly thought we had a very clear definition for residency, but we stopped tracking Alaska, and Alaska stopped tracking us as we finalized and put ours forward, and Alaska modified their residency as issues came up with them, and it fell through the cracks. So there was some discrepancies amongst the two states on how they were looking at residency, and we fixed that for round one, and we're working to work on a clear, concise, and consistent approach across the states, the West Coast states, on the residency issue. We know that there was confusion about that and some eligibility, and we're trying to clear that up as well. And then we have learned more about and want to make sure that everybody understands what the more than whole designation means from a NOAA standard. As we got our spend plan approved, we were able to then further meet with NOAA and clarify a bunch of different issues around that more than whole statement or requirement. So what is our timeline currently? The spend plan deadline is July 1st of 2021. So just inside a month. And the grant obligation is September 30th. So NOAA has to have the funding to Pacific states no later than September 30th. So our spend plan goes in, gets reviewed, approved. The grant paperwork is done by Pacific states on our behalf to NOAA. Then NOAA can transmit the funding. That secures the funding for round 2. It does not have to be distributed by September 30th. It just needs to be awarded to the grantee by that date. And as we get closer into the final development of our spend plan, we'll have an application deadline and be able to modify that and provide that on our website. And it will also be on the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission website as well. So what are some of the key details of the spend plan? We all know what a diverse commercial fishing industry that we have by species, by area. It's also that diverse by the type of business, whether they're large LLCs or individuals within each of those sectors. And so we're trying to do our best at making sure that all of those folks, all those business owners are have an opportunity to apply and that are eligible for the grant opportunity or the fisheries assistance opportunity. And then along that line, trying to be fair and inclusive. So anybody who falls into one of these categories is eligible for opportunity under this the Washington Spend Plan. This isn't the way all the states did it. Some of the states required you to have, if you had an Alaska license, but you didn't have that particular state's license, they wouldn't allow you to apply to their state for funding. That's not the way we did it. That we don't believe that that was the intent of the congressional bill or the law that the president signed into place. So we're trying to make sure that the parameters that we identified and that were clearly identified either through the bill and or through further questions that we've been able to ask, that we're able to do that. So basically the Washington Spend Plan was crafted to be inclusive and fair. This required adding more rules to the plan. Paying for some people makes it more complicated, we understand. Some of which only apply to certain people. So, and then every applicant should make sure and read the spend plans and the instructions closely. And if you need any assistance, we would recommend that you seek professional assistance through an accountant for helping fill out the applications. Again, we can be available for answering questions about what we know and what we do, but the fund piece and what your revenues have been, either yourself or your bookkeeper would be best to chat with there. So feedback opportunities, this is the fun part for me because, public meetings aren't for me to talk, they're for you to ask questions and see if we've thought about what you're talking or what your question is and make sure that we do understand it and then provide a response if we can, either here or in follow-up. So we realize that funds have not been distributed from round 1. That's just due to the volume of applications and the complexity of applications that Pacific States has gone through. No Washington fund distribution has occurred yet. But we'd like to hear back from you on, what worked in the application period. What did you find challenging? And in both of those, if even if you thought it worked, if you have some ideas for improvement, we'd really like to hear about them. And then just a reminder slide on raising your hand on the Zoom features. I think those are pretty straightforward on your phone. Again, raise your hand, it's *9. You should hear you've been unmuted. If you don't hear that, you may need to dial *6 to unmute yourself. So it's your turn.
Thanks, Ron. I'll just jump in here. First, we have Reve and Aaron O'Leary. Reve and Aaron O'Leary, you should be unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we
I
can.
certainly can.
Thank you, Ron, for that presentation. So my first question is in regards to fishing guides. I'm disappointed to hear yet again that they're not being included in this second round. I know I heard during the presentation that you were trying to include as many people and be as fair and equitable as possible. I'm just not sure why we were yet again excluded. Just looking into the other states, both Oregon, California, and Alaska included guides targeting anadromous fish. Washington was only including those charter licensed fisheries.
Yeah. And thank you very much for the direct question, Reve. I appreciate that. Between round 1 and round 2, we did a lot of look back at conversations that we've had over time. You know, we look back at January of 2020 when the headlines really started to activate about COVID-19, and Congress was talking about the development of aid packages, and we were hearing locally and nationally, even around the world, about the food shortages and making sure, or the possibility of food shortages, and making sure that those food chains were staying in place, that they were predictable into the future, regardless of what was going on from the not yet called the pandemic yet, I don't think, but just making sure that they were reliable. And what we did is we looked back and looked at the bill. The bill had talked about through some conversation, and then looked at the bill. The conversations were that as the bill was developed, it was looking at making sure the commercial industry was being maintained, so that you maintain the infrastructures that that the presence of that infrastructure would remain through this horrible thing that we went through. The short story is that from that point, we looked at the bill, and the bill specifically called out charters, but did not call out guides. It was NOAA that allowed the authorization for states to look at further supply chains, whether you could go to, as long as it was commercial driven, you could go to bait shops, you could go to ice manufacturers and suppliers, you could do all kinds of things and broaden the scope of where the fisheries assistance funding was or linked to or provided to. And we opted just to stay with the language and the sectors that were called out for within the bill itself. And
Ron, can I just, so the language that I remember reading is for hire charters. And it's
for hires in the allocation table. It's not in the actual bill. It actually calls charters out in the bill itself. That's the way I remember it, Reve. I'd have to look it up.
And I guess I get the argument that, you know, the food chain argument, But how is a fishing guide different than a fishing charter, except Washington has designated them and codified them with a slightly different definition?
Yeah, and you know, the only thing I can, I don't know why they didn't call out a broader range of industry than they did. And the only thing I can think of is that my understanding of guides versus charters, or charters are oftentimes larger vessels and are less portable or transferable. And they are, because of that, they're in those rural communities and are supplying more economic benefit to the fishing industry because they are in those rural communities. But that's my guess. My speculation, I guess. It's not a definite answer. We didn't hear that from any congressional staff, or it's just my speculation of why they did that. I also know that over the years, through the fisheries disaster relief legislation, that there's been, the charters were in, then they were out, then they're working really hard. Congressional delegation is working really hard to get them back in through some bill modifications that have been going through the federal legislative process. And so I'm sure that it's a heightened sector because of that. And that may have also led into some of that.
And just to follow up on that, again, Alaska, Oregon, and California all included guides in their packages.
Mhm.
Also, we had local county grants who excluded guides because they assumed that they would be included in this funding. And it was a discriminator that they used in distributing CARES Act funding.
I don't know how they made that determination, Reve. As far as I know, the team that I worked with on this were never contacted by the counties to make that determination. We would have been clear from the start on what we were going to do. And Reve, thank you for the question. If you have more as the evening goes on, please buzz back in. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I mean, I thought that this was our chance to kind of, work through this issue, and it seems like you guys are dead set on not including us again, and it's very frustrating. So I appreciate your answers. It's a decision that you guys are making. It's not just the language that you've read, because again, other states have interpreted that differently. So I'm still not understanding the justification or reasoning. So I appreciate your responses, but I would like a better response in going forward, because it still doesn't make sense.
Thanks, Reve. I'll work at trying to clean up my response.
Thanks, Reve. Next, we have Luke Gardner. Luke, you've been unmuted.
Yes. Hey, I listened to your presentation on the round one, and I think it was at this stage, and there was a lot of people that struck up an issue with the way let me back up a little bit here.
Okay.
So as commercial fishers, we have businesses, and our businesses don't stay the same through time. So what happens is we grow our businesses. As we grow our businesses, our investment is larger. Also, our expected gross should climb as well. And so I know that there was a lot of grief with a lot of people that they'd seen growth in their company, they'd invested more, they'd seen growth, and then because of that growth, it disqualified them from getting into any CARES Act. So they may have expected to gross, let's just say arbitrarily, $100,000, and they may have not actually got what they expected because of this disaster. But yet, because their company is 3 times the size that it was 5 years before, they still don't qualify because of the fact that their business grew. And when we're looking at qualifiers that only base on your gross, that's always going to be a problem. The problem that we've really received here with all of this pandemic is, and our processors aren't bashful about telling us this, that they had massive overhead because of this that influenced our X vessel value. And our X vessel value was severely compromised a year ago. And that's more of an indicator of what our financial hit actually was our X vessel value. Now, we have seen a little bit of more money trickle in since, but it's not representative of those processors receiving some aid and then having that aid actually come through the way that it should have been. It kind of seems like the processor got a little tiny bit of help. Maybe they spent 10 million, maybe they got 2 million back, and we might have received 1/10 of that, and that's where we're at. And I'd just like to see that in this round 2 that we look at the price of the product, because that's really where all the money comes from. And then when you apply that towards what somebody made, then it's equitable as their business grows. You got any feedback on that?
Yeah, look, unfortunately, I don't have a lot. The way in which we were to direct the applicants to apply was that, yeah, we could go net or gross. That's a choice. And in round 1, we talked to sectors. We not only had these larger invite everybody, but we had sector meetings as well. And most of the sectors were telling us to stick with the gross revenues. And so them knowing the business and how it would benefit them, in turn benefiting Washington, that's what caused us to stay with the gross revenues. So I don't have anything other than that. I am interested in hearing maybe or seeing in writing maybe a clearer picture of how coming away from that gross revenue would look. The difficulty in the price of the product that you're selling, you better than I, that likely is a great indicator of how the business is doing. But how do you go back and do that from a 2015 through 19 look and then assure yourself all of that? That's what I don't have clarity in my head, at least at this time, about.
Yeah, well, what happened between 2015 and 2019 is history. It's really easy to look back and see what happened there. And the processors aren't bashful about telling everybody under the sun that our price was severely compromised because of the extra burden of the cost of COVID this last year. And so, we all went out there, we kept the food chain alive. We plugged the processors, we plugged the tenders, we put them all in a can and a fillet in a bag, and they all made their way to people's mouth. They all got sold. But the problem is they spent a whole bunch of money doing that, trying to quarantine and get people where they needed to be, and just the cost of business. It really equated to somewhere between 20 and maybe even 40 cents a pound ex vessel price for Bristol Bay. And that's the fishery that I'm involved with. And, we had a place like that is a little more boom and bust. I suppose I shouldn't say that. Most fisheries are boom and bust, but you know, you have a couple years that are really good, and then you'll have a bunch of years that aren't so good. And if you don't really capitalize on those years that are really good, it really leaves you holding the bag when you come across those years that aren't so good. And so this pandemic happened to land right on a, you know, at the top of the swell of what should have been the best of the best of the best of the best for that Bristol Bay sector. And so we saw a real large volume of fish come through. Everybody was in a real good position to do good things with them as far as the processors, which should have equated to a pretty solid fish price. And in the end, we ended up with a soft price because of COVID, and because of the volume that was behind it, rather than it being one of those best of the best years, it just turned into a mediocre. And so that's not expressed with our gross revenue because of the timing of this pandemic and the natural flow of or the natural cycle of Bristol Bay in itself. I mean, we were on a real high swell there when that came through, and it really negated any possibility for anybody that went to Bristol Bay and runs a business up there and then brings all that money home to Washington and spends it, to really show any loss. And I know that might sound like that's not really a bad thing, but when you don't have those big years to support the lean years, it eventually ends up affecting you pretty harshly down the road.
Yeah. And Luke, thanks. I do understand the bigger years versus the middle of the road type of years and how businesses need that. Thank you for that. I'll ask Corey, do you have any comments before? Unfortunately, I don't have a great comment for Luke or consideration for him at this time.
Yeah. Hi, thanks, Ron. Can you hear me okay?
We can, yes.
Yeah, and hi, Luke. I don't know that I was following all the details as well as you are and Ron are, but yeah, I think we put some thought into this after, I think it was right at the start of round one about the growing business issue, and the only solution we've heard is the one Ron mentioned about going to the net revenues, and it wouldn't be the X vessel. The price alone wouldn't be that wasn't good enough for the folks we're having to approve this through for, but it would have to actually, be the combination of the drop in revenues. But the growing business part seems mostly about the outlays in terms of increased investment and cost. But I don't know, in talking to the other states, I don't know that anyone has found a good solution to that one. And as Ron said, the net revenue part just complicated it for a lot of folks, was the other side of the coin.
I guess, Corey, if I can, just a little bit of dialogue with you. So from my, at least as I think through this, if the processors were claiming a loss and they were showing that to make ends meet, that they had reduced paid prices for product because of COVID activities, and that's how they declared their loss. Couldn't an individual get that information from that processor and then use that as the price point and where they're after the volume that they sold, show the adjustment of what they should have sold absent COVID? I just don't know if the spend plans allow it that way for processors, things like that. But
yeah, I don't know we ever got to that level of detail thinking, but we were treating the seafood sector, as NIMS was calling it, as the seafood sector, and their books are their books, and
yeah,
the commercial fishing for their books. But yeah, it was just that the revenue and the combination, if it was net revenue, is that combination of increased cost or in decreased revenue, and but then the whole issue about the 5-year average being not representative of a business that's grown is maybe even a little bit separate than that. But I have not heard from the other states any ideas on silver bullets for that one, but we could think again about it.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. Appreciate it. Luke, thank you very much for the questions.
Yep, thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for jumping on here. If you have more questions later, jump back in.
Thanks, Luke. Next, we have Larry Thevick. Larry, you've been unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Mr. Thievik, how are you, sir?
I'm doing relatively well. Thank you, Ron. I hope you are
Good.
as well. So I'm not completely sure where to begin, but one of the things that that kind of troubles me is it seems to me it's kind of hard to reconcile moving forward with many of the complicated questions that we still have remaining from round 1 into round 2 without having some measure of how successful we were in round 1 and accomplishing the task of offering relief to as many people as possible in as equitable a way as possible. And I understand there's timelines that you need to meet so that we don't lose the opportunity. I have that, but it seems to me it's going to be it's pretty hard to gauge what it is we've learned. You asked a question you said to ask us what went right and maybe what went wrong with round 1, and frankly we do not know because we've hardly seen any information on how round 1 will flush out. There's been no update excuse me, on the tri-state recording on the status of the plan since May 10th. There's been, as far as I know, very little exchange between, I guess, the examiners of the applications and the applicants. I believe we are the only Alaska and Washington are the only states that have not had a distribution of funds. And I understand that, we had a pretty complicated scenario, and this is a complicated process. I understand all that, but frankly, I don't think we've, at least from my perspective, I don't see how much we have learned so far to be too aggressive on changes or way to fix things from round 1, because we haven't seen round 1's completion. Something that I would suggest when we look at issues of equity is that perhaps when we do finally see the ratio of claims to payment in round 1, that same ratio would be potentially used in round 2, that you wouldn't have payments, let's say, that were not proportional to each other between the 2 rounds. That seems to me to kind of challenge the idea of equity. And of course, you can't do that until you see the product, and we haven't seen much of the first product yet. And of course, from the beginning, I have felt there's a fundamental flaw in the disaster relief basis for determination of loss with the 35% threshold, and thought that we should always have had a more scalable way to do it. And I appreciated that you had attempts to try to do a way to capture some of those instances where losses were significant, but they may not have measured up to 35% over the longer term. So you accommodated the monthly adjustment, which I appreciated, and I would be curious to know if you have the same thing proposed in the second. But frankly, I have not. I had one reach out from Pacific States and ask a question after I submitted my application, whether or not I was applying for 100% of the losses of the fishery or whether I was applying for a portion of it. And it turns out in that case, I was applying for a portion. It was a lease permit. But that's it. I haven't heard a thing. And so the idea that there seems to be this dynamic process going on to finally process these applications and get the funds dispersed, I'm not seeing that dynamism. I may be wrong, but frankly, I'm not seeing much of it. Those are some of the issues that I am concerned about. And I think we need to see some more results from round one before we get too carried away in round two.
Well, Larry, I appreciate your comments. I'd love to see results of round one. We certainly had predicted way back when that a round two was going to come our way. It has. However, it took us longer to get the round one spend plan approved than we thought it would. And that as well as some of the issues that we ran into with other states and the home port issue that was put into place has caused this residency issue. I know that we're just over 100 applications for reconciliation to be done with Washington round one. That portion of the process that would then lead to distribution normally. But I don't know what Pacific States is going to do and if they have to also reconcile all of Alaska before they distribute to either state because of the home port issue. I don't know that. I do know that Alaska had 70,000 applicants because of the subsistence program that they have to their Alaskan individuals. So I'm not sure how long that's going to take. So I'm not sure, it's still up in the air a bit. I'm not sure that we're going to have a look, and what we have to have is an approved spend plan so that NOAA can send the funding. Whether or not we could modify that after the fact, I think puts all of it in jeopardy. And I quite honestly am not willing to make any recommendations to the state of Washington to put round two in jeopardy to try to change things after we have an approved spend plan.
Well, I appreciate, some of the difficulty of trying to hindcast. That's one reason why I would like to see more results so that we're not put in a position to have to hindcast. But maybe it's a question you could answer, Ron. And again, I appreciate the efforts that have been dedicated to this. But again, it's really difficult to answer the question, what did we learn? What was wrong? What was right? Because we just haven't seen any real results. You mentioned Alaska had potentially 70,000 applicants. Can you quantify the number of claims in terms of participants in Washington? And do you have a ballpark estimate of the amount of the claims that have been submitted so far? If you said, I think you had 100 permits you had to reconcile in terms of residency issue. So that means there has to be a...
Larry, not necessarily for residency, just reconcile. I didn't tie residency to the reconciliation of the final. It's just making sure that all of the applicants are correct and understood so that they can be checked off and move forward.
So with that number, that seems like a relatively small number to me. So the information that you've gleaned so far, with a number as small as 100 still outstanding, what seems to be the ballpark claim amount that your applicants have requested in round one, and how many participants then, absent the 100, have made application?
We have the question out to Pacific States. They haven't yet got back to us on our total application pool. We believe that the request for funds was 10 times the allocated amount, but we're still waiting for the final tallies of all of the applications as they become concluded, so that we can see how many applicants are viable and how much of that total request was.
That's certainly a significant difference between claims potentially and relief potentially, 10 cents on the dollar. And again, like I say, I think in terms of equity, if the second round in the end might, let's say for sake of argument, distribute 50 cents on the dollar, and the first round is 10 cents on the dollar, I think then there was kind of a transitional failure of that. But we don't know that's going to happen, so that's
Right.
conjecture.
Sure.
Anyway, I would like to see more response from Pacific States. Pacific States, when I talked to them, kind of were talking about Washington, Alaska being tardy in their spend plan approvals, and that they really were just waiting. And I don't even know what that means. It certainly is different than what you described. I don't know what they were supposedly waiting for. I put in a request for a return call and I never got one. So that's why I talk about what seems to be the lack of dynamism that you kind of referred to earlier, that there was this dynamic going on, and I'm not sure what that dynamic is.
Yeah, and Larry, I can't speak to Alaska. I know Alaska's time frame was much different than ours, so them waiting until those fisheries were concluded to try to complete their spend plan. A much different scenario than Washington. Washington was just trying to work with Alaska, who hadn't started spend plan development to the level of that we were. And so we were waiting on them. Pacific States can call that tardy or call that Alaska was trying to fulfill the obligations to the Alaskan citizens that they felt obligated to. And we were trying to do our best in not creating a problem where we didn't avoid with the residency issue because of the home porting difficulties and complexities. So, but thanks a lot for the questions. I too wish we had more information so that we could have a better understanding, some lessons learned that were applicable to the outcome of the spend plan, not the development of the spend plan or how easy it was or how difficult it was just to fill out an application. And that's primarily all we have to go on right now because we don't have an outcome.
Right. Well, I appreciate your attempt to try to answer some of my questions. And but again, it's been 14 months, and certainly the intention of the Congress with the passage of the disaster fund relief portion of the CARES Act was designed to try to get money to the fleet that needed it in a timely manner. And 14 months and still waiting is not what I consider timely for whatever reasons. And I'm not necessarily endorsing the description I got from Tri-State relative to tardiness. I'm just sharing what I thought was a lack of forthcoming response to my inquiries.
Okay, thanks, Larry.
Thanks, Larry. So we have a few hands up here, and I just want to remind folks to ask a question or provide your feedback. You can use the raise hand feature on the computer or press *9 for folks calling in over the phone. And next I will jump to Bob. Bob, you've been unmuted.
Hi, Ron, how are you?
Very good. How are you, Bob?
Oh, live and kicking, live and kicking. So obviously, in regard to Reve's original comments, you guys have decided to exclude the guides again in this second round. Is there some funding that was available to the guides that was not available to these other folks that got funding?
Bob, I don't have any idea. I'm not a tracker or the one that you need to ask that question to. I don't track all of the federal funding that came out relative to the pandemic to know who got what and what it was, what all the pieces were for and what the qualifications were and who it was intended for. I just don't have that information.
Right. It's I guess it's clear to the 575 guides in the state of Washington versus the 127 charter boats in the state of Washington that they're obviously more important and that they get funding through this. And it's obviously important that the other states like Alaska and Washington or Oregon and California obviously appreciate their guides and fought for their guides to be able to get this funding. And it's apparently very clear that Washington doesn't feel that way about their guides, which is very disheartening.
Well, I'm sorry you feel that way. We stuck to the language that was in the bill that called out charters. When NOAA allowed states to further go down into the supply chain of commercial industry, we opted not to go down that because of the thought that we were going to be in this situation that Mr. Thievick described as 10 cents on the dollar, and to further diminish that to an industry and participants. And so we left it as clear as we could as it was described by Congress and NOAA. We did not further expand in any direction. We just left it where it was.
Okay. I just was putting it out there that, that unfortunately I think this language between a charter industry and a guide industry that both are for hire, that both provide food, who both provide that thing should be one and the same.
And I completely understand that line of thinking, Bob. I appreciate you coming on. And it's not that we value one over the other. It was language. It wasn't a determination on guides versus charters. It was determination on what information did we have in front of us, and do we broaden the pie to more people. That's all it was, and we were trying to stick to the letter of the law that was signed into place.
So is
not a value of the industry at all.
Right. So is this a done deal? Basically, guides are out. I mean, is this a done deal?
We're trying to make as few of modifications to the spend plan as we can. Because of the timing, we've only got a couple weeks left before the spend plan is due. So I've checked in with all the folks that I need to, whether or not there are pressures out there that would say, please change this. I don't know that. I don't have that crystal ball, but right now we're planning on sticking to the sectors as identified in the bill and that we had in the spend plan in round one.
Have you shared this with your staff?
I've shared this with my staff. I've shared this with agency staff. I've also briefed the individuals above me that need to have that understanding and know what we were intending to do and the differences between round one and round two, if any. Right.
I was just curious. I was on a Department of Fish and Wildlife meeting here just before this one, And I was told that, you know, as many guides could show up to this meeting and try to do that, and that the agency was looking to try to include guides in this round. And from what you're saying, it doesn't sound like that's a possibility. So it sounds like there might be a communication problem.
Sounds like it.
Thank you. Have a nice night.
Thanks, Bob. You too.
Yep.
Thanks, Bob. Next up, we have Lori Steele. Lori, you've been unmuted.
Hey, Lori.
Hey, thank you.
There you go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm in a hotel and I'm hoping I have decent reception. I will keep my comments and questions really brief and just follow up with your staff afterwards. Thank you again, Ron, for the effort. I know round one has been quite an effort, and we are eagerly awaiting the distribution from round one. Just to keep things short for this discussion, I was wondering if you could just elaborate on what I think I saw in your presentation about the round two spend plan, reflecting a split between the eligible sectors in terms of the $40 million. So are you going to upfront split that among the sectors? And if so, how did I miss that during your presentation?
Yeah, we used the word split amongst sectors, Lori. That's not our intention. So we're not going to divide up the pie prior to everything happening. It's still the same as round one. That could have been just a really poor choice of words.
Okay.
So thank you for catching that, and my apologies if that had any confusion.
Okay, no, thank you for the clarification. So it sounds like from your presentation, aside from addressing the eligibility issues and the sort of the lessons learned through the application process, the structure of the spend plan will be largely the same as round one, just for a different time frame. Is that correct?
Unless we hear something astronomically that went wrong in round one, or some major difficulties that people had in applying, in round one, we're hoping to keep it as similar as possible.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. And thanks for your work on this. We really appreciate it.
You bet, Lori. Thanks.
Thanks, Lori. Next up, we have Paul Ackerman. Paul, you've been unmuted.
Can you hear me?
I can, Paul.
Okay, so I just, in January 2019, I was part of what was then the Northwest Guides and Anglers Association. And we had a meeting with Kelly Suswin, Kelly Cunningham, and some others. I was really motivated by the new director's focus on communication. And so, and this might be an effort to communicate, but what it feels like is like the jury's already made up their mind before the evidence is presented. I mean, if that's what communication is, I think it falls short, because I was hoping tonight we'd have an ability to provide input and kind of broaden the department's view of the decisions that they've made. But with that being said, Ron, I heard you say that NOAA Fisheries approves a plan, and that would be a plan put forth in part by the department. You said it was broadly interpreted. You talked about inclusion, but what I see here is when you have the ability to look at the language. So we look at the language of the original bill or the Congress's intent, but the language in NOAA says it, commercial fishing businesses and charter / for hire fishing businesses. That slash everywhere means and or for hire fishing businesses. So when you break that down, when you're looking at it just on that level, and you break it down, and we're talking about inclusion, to me, that's the evidence is obvious that it's an opportunity for you to include another group. And again, this has been said before, but the only thing that by definition, fishing guides in Washington are also charters. It's where the department allows us to operate that is why they delineated two different names. I've done a bunch of research on the word charter, and I really don't see where there's an argument that fishing guides in Washington State are not providing charter services. We're certainly providing for hire fishing, and we are for hire fishing businesses. So I don't understand how we don't meet the terminology that is out there for review. And so since we are post decision, I guess this is an opportunity just to vent. And if that's what these forums are, I wrote a letter to Kelly Cunningham on June 2nd. And I put that in there, that I find these forums unproductive. And that's the reason, is because the decisions are made. So what I hear is the department made a poor decision of not including guides on the first round. And we're gonna double down on that and not include freshwater guides on the second round. So I guess my question is, what is the legal definition by the department for application for a charter? And how do you get to that? Is it saltwater? Is it because you've sold a license, or somebody's bought a charter license from another individual? And my last question is, since the department got to choose the winners and losers, are the decisions defensible? Has it been vetted with the AG's office, and is there a right to challenge?
So Paul, thanks. I'm not sure I can answer all of your questions. I know that our spend plan through round one was reviewed by our representatives from the Attorney General's office. It wasn't done it was done for kind of red flags. No red flags were raised. We continue to work forward, working with the governor's office to get a spend plan put in place, governor's office and the other state agencies that were involved. Relative to the definition of the licenses, I don't have that in front of me right now, and I don't have it memorized. I know that, so I can commit to getting back to you. So all of the folks who have spoken so far on the charters, I hope you're still, or the guides, I hope you're still on. Yes, I'm here advocating as the lead to leave the spend plan as it was in round one. Do I still have to brief the director after this meeting? Absolutely. And make sure that he knows how a public meeting is going and how the federal fisheries assistance funding is processing and progressing. So I don't have that final say, but that's the direction I've been given coming into tonight's meeting by those that I've briefed, or from those who I've briefed. So I do appreciate your comments, and look forward to, we'll try to get back to you, Paul. If Kelly has your contact information, I can get that from him and get you the definitions of charters versus guides.
I appreciate that. And you know, I mean, it's just, it is frustrating because we feel like, you know, we have to go, like, we're always fighting the like with the closures on the coast this year and no fishing out of a floating device. That we have the meeting with the commissioners, and it's always like after the decisions are made. And I can't tell you how frustrating that is to be treated that way. And I appreciate that if you would get that information back to me, because I want to know specifically whether or not, if I operate on the Columbia River, whether or not I am eligible, or just by the definition of alone by Washington State statute or WACS excludes me from being able to apply.
So Paul, before you go, Corey, did you take notes on that? Obviously we're recording, but did you take notes on that so that we can debrief and look this up and get information back to Paul?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, sir. Paul, we will get back to you, I promise.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I'm not seeing any other raised hands right now. As a reminder for folks, if you, oh, here we go. Jason, you've been unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
I certainly can. Thanks, Jason.
Okay, I missed the beginning of this meeting, so if you've already answered this, just go ahead and tell me and I'll rewatch it later. My question was if you had plans to make the second round more equitable in terms of the scaling adjustments and the marginal rate adjustments.
Well, the difficulty we're having, Jason, is that we won't have the benefit of seeing round one results to know how to make the adjustment work better because we won't see outcomes, or at least we don't think we will. The Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission staff that have been working hard on getting all the coastwide applications done have about 100+ applications to get through that are just validation that they're accurate, that they have questions on. So those 100+ are still yet to go for Washington. And then there's some question about whether Pacific states can distribute funds or if they have to reconcile Alaska prior to, because of the home porting issue. And my apologies, I went into a little bit detail and forgot the main breadth of your question. Can you restate it for me, Jason?
Are there any plans to make changes to the marginal rate adjustments or anything like that? My real question is, it doesn't seem like it'd be too hard to sort of protect because in the marginal rate adjustment, the first 200,000 of the claim has not been reduced, but then you've got the proportional scaling adjustment. If that hits that 200,000, you know, it could go down to $15,000 or something like that. Is there any simple way you could protect those very small businesses from the proportional scaling so that they're not left out?
Well, and Jason, that's thanks for the question, because that's exactly what the intent of our two kind of breakpoints were, is it is to try to protect the smallest businesses, those that weren't asking for as much from the fishery assistance. And so we'll look at that. Hopefully we'll have some info on that before we wrap up. But again, I think that the timing for Pacific states to be complete, for us to see what distribution might look like and utilize that for round two, is next to zero of a chance, just because of that 100 applications and the deadline for round two applications being in about 2 weeks, 2+ weeks. So it's going to be very, very difficult, but that topic is worthy of a look. We will certainly talk about that again. If you have any specific ideas on what that would look like to do that, I'd be interested in further conversation.
I guess my idea would just be to sort of exempt under, say it, take $100,000 or $50,000 and exempt them from the proportional scaling adjustment, not the marginal rate adjustment, because they're already immune to that.
Okay, we can talk internally about that. I really do appreciate you coming on and giving us some ideas like that, Jason. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thanks, Jason. Next up, we have Mikey Backman. Mikey, you've been unmuted.
Thank you. I go by Mike. Anyway, sorry about that. Anyway, my question was, when's the deadline for when you're going to pay on the first one? Is there a deadline for when they have to write the check? Or, I've heard about deadlines to do number two, but I haven't heard about deadlines for when they're going to actually finish the first one.
Yeah, and Mike, thanks for the question. We don't have a deadline relative to when distribution has to be sent. I know that Pacific States is working as hard as they can. We remain available to answer all the questions that we can to help work through the application issues that they're facing, and just trying to get it out the door as quick as we can. The residency issue between us and Alaska has delayed, and we just stay vigilant in trying to provide information as quickly as we can back to Pacific States, so that we're not contributing to the additional delay to individuals who need the funding.
And the second part of that question then would be, what if you have to contact? Because a lot of those guys are commercial fishing. It's going to be commercial fishing season here really soon, and a lot of these guys are going to be gone. So if you try to call, like say for example, call me, my number's not going to work. I'm going to be gone. And a lot of these other commercial fishermen from Alaska are going to be up there, not here, where they're not. If you have questions, or if what if we have to? Is there anything else we have to do, or because we won't be able to get a hold of us if we have to do some more, answer questions or whatever, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Mike, I'm not positive what Pacific States protocol is, and on emails / phone calls, that kind of stuff. I'll phone a friend again and see if Corey has an idea about what they've been doing thus far, and how they may handle a situation that you described.
Yeah, thanks, Ron, and hi, Mike. Not too much more to add. I know the States has expressed a preference for email. I don't know if you have email when you're out fishing. I know it's in Alaska. That's one of we heard Larry say Alaska was the last to go. But the reason that you gave was their main concern, and they're expressing that too in round two of people are out in the water, out of touch during the time frame when the applications might be going on. So we didn't have too many situations we heard about this round and people not being reachable. We had a couple that got a hold of us, and I think they've all worked out okay. If the application period is open when you're gone, then yeah, the options you might have, if someone else could fill it out for you. I don't know if you have someone who can help you with that, but we folks that is definitely something people are talking about. The challenge, as Ron's said a number of times, is the timeline we've been given, and it's coming up on the time of year when a lot of folks go fishing.
Well, thank you. I guess we'll go catch up to you on the backside. We'll give you other contact information, so if you have questions, you can contact us.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. Next up, we have former Fish and Wildlife Commissioner Kehoe. Former Commissioner Kehoe, you should be unmuted.
So that's what we got to do, I guess, is email them, like your email or something, so if they have questions.
Hello?
Hey, Bob, how are you?
Hey, thank you. Good, Ron, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Yeah, so, just a couple rapid fire questions. Following up on the last person, has specific states, have they just basically, have they given you any idea when the first round of funds might be distributed?
Megan or Corey, in our last meeting, did that come up at all? You guys were able to attend and I was not there.
I did ask, and they had an aspirational goal of the end of this month. I wouldn't take that to the bank, but it sounds like I actually have fewer applications to go through, what Ron updated us on than even last week. So maybe that's a goal. We had asked them, the spend plan asked them to, it was like sometime in the May 20th around then, we had asked them to get payments out, but they told us just a few weeks ago that was, or no, a week or two before that they couldn't hit that. So yeah, it was a soft, maybe hoping by the end of this month.
But doesn't sound like you're too confident that that's gonna happen. I
don't mean to.
No, that's fine. I mean, I think,
that's too.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, and so Ron, I'm still, I'm trying to figure out what the hang up is. I mean, these applications were due what, in April 9, and so you mentioned that some of them are incomplete. Washington residents applying to Alaska, and then thirdly, the residency issues. So, I know you and I talked, I don't know, about a month or so ago, and as far as the residency issues, are you still in conversations with Pacific states, with Alaska and NOAA on trying to iron out that requirement, or has that been solidified?
It's been corrected for round 1. Round 2, we are working with all 4 states to make sure that we all have common usable language that's more consistent than it was in round 1.
Okay, so that's a round 2 issue, but
yep.
As far as round 1, those residency those questions, those have been kind of ironed out, and so now it's just kind of
getting through the applications.
Yeah. Okay, got it. So then, as far as round 2 is concerned, this 40 million. I know last time the 50 million that was to be accessed by the tribes. So do the tribes have access to this 40 million? And that was a hang up, as I recall last time, long conversations with the co-managers. So yeah, so is this 40 million, is this just for non-tribal folks?
At this point, yes. The in between round 1 and round 2, there was a push by the state, the tribes, to further increase the tribal allocation. We've been trying to get some responses from the tribes on that topic. Have not been as successful as we want to be, but we're getting closer. But we believe that the 40 million for the state of Washington will be for non-treaty. Let me make sure I say that right, because there are tribal members who have Washington state licenses that are eligible for this, but it's for the Washington state licenses and permits.
Okay.
To the best of my knowledge.
Okay. Okay. And then moving along, you know, on the requirements of, you know, being made whole. You know, I remember there from the first round, you could not include things such as SBA loans or PPP loans, or those actually would then be counted against your gross revenues, right? So then my question is, so many commercial fishermen received in November, December of 2020, USDA trade assistance money, which was not at all COVID related, but more directed or intended to compensate fishermen like farmers who have been impacted by retaliatory tariffs by the Chinese on US seafood products. Mm-hmm. So the question is, when people apply for the second round, do they have to include income that they received from the USDA for trade assistance, not for COVID?
Megan, you want to help me out on that one?
Yeah, and Corey, please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding from our discussion with NOAA a couple months ago was those were one of the funding sources that would not count towards. So those would be omitted.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So I think it would be good to get confirmation on that when you do release the final spending plan. Because like I say, many Washington residents that commercially fish in Alaska and commercially fish in Washington did receive this USDA trade money. So that would be a good thing to clarify. And so then well, one request for the deadline, some other people have referred to it. If the spending plan is due July 1, there are many people that Washington residents that fish in Alaska that will be, consumed with trying to make a living and fishing in Alaska through, mid-September at least. So please have that in mind when you come up with an application deadline. The fact that there are commercial fisheries ongoing in the summer months are when a bulk of commercial fishermen are engaged in trying to make a livelihood. So please take that into consideration. And then as far as lessons learned, there was a great deal of confusion up until almost the end of the deadline period to apply, as far as whether people could use a cash accounting method or accrual for purposes of establishing or documenting that requisite 35% loss. So, hopefully, and as I recall, the outcome is that applicants could use either accounting method so long as they used it consistently. So I assume that's still the case. And again, I think a lesson learned from last time would be to clarify that people can use either accounting method when putting together their application for purposes of establishing their eligibility under the 35% loss requirement. So that's all I have. Thank you, Ron and team.
And Bob, before you go, your interpretation of the cash accounting or accrual to represent the 35% loss is correct, that you just have to remain consistent We have that in our notes to double check the spend plan to make sure it's clear in there so that there is less misinterpretation or less confusion by the words in the plan for everyone. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Ron,
You
and
bet.
thanks, team.
Next up, we have Larry Thievik. Larry, you've been unmuted.
Hey, Larry. You might have to unmute yourself, Larry.
How about now?
And now is perfect.
Okay, these are mostly clarification questions, not like the policy questions I had earlier. So in your presentation, you referred to a grant time deadline for round 2 is, I believe it was September 30th.
Mhm.
Just for clarification, 1, what was the grant time in round 1? And then 2, I appreciated Lori's question because I had the same question relative to the sectors and the reference, what seemed to be a reference to, although I kind of think it's a good idea, but it's not being done, this pre-assignment of portions of the relief to sectors. But you did also reference that there were some differences in the between round 1 and round 2, and I'm a little, I don't understand yet what some of those differences are, although we heard a little of them relative to Bob's questions. And then I wondered what would be the potential for a request to extend the, or petition for an extension of the time period for the submission of the spend plan if in fact there were some benefits to be had by seeing the results of round 1 before moving too far down round 2.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. So first question was on the grant obligation of September 30th. Both round 1 and round 2 used the statutory language in 12005, which links funds having to be obligated by NOAA by September 30th of 2021. So what that means is that funds in round 1 and in round 2 have to be obligated to Pacific states for the grant opportunities within each state's spend plans by that date. We already have round 1 funds obligated, and shortly after, I'm guessing within a couple of weeks after the spend plans are approved and the grant applications that's electronic between Pacific states and NOAA, that the funds would then be obligated shortly thereafter. So, but that's why all of the states are trying to meet the July 1st deadline so that we don't push that window of possibly losing the funding because of the missed date. We've got to get it obligated to Pacific states so that then the application processes for all the states and then the distribution can occur. And so that's what we're referencing in those dates. And then you're going to have to remind me about the other questions.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. I have to remind myself. So one was you did reference early on that there were expected differences between the 2 plans, and
yep,
I'm not completely sure we cataloged those. And then and then you kind of answered it in your summary of the grant time. You know, I asked about what there might be, would there be a benefit to request an extension for the development of the spend plan or the submission of it to see better what happened in round 1 first.
Yeah. the extension is more difficult. I think that we'd be the only state that does that. At least that's what I would have been told. Everybody else is just driving as hard as they can to get money out the door as quick as they can. Certainly some of those states are, were complete and were the first ones to receive funds and first ones to have funds distributed to their industry sectors. So a little bit easier for them to, because they have the information from round one and will make any modifications needed in round two. I don't think that we want to push too close to the line. And therefore we have been working our tails off at trying to make sure that round one questions are all being answered in a timely manner, and that we're trying to achieve the deadlines that NOAA has asked us to achieve relative to the July 1 spend plan deadline. So I know that doesn't directly answer your question, Larry, but I don't have what that might look like and how it would work. And if you get closer, are there risks of federal fiscal year ends and people sweeping money and ending things? And is it more? Yeah, I don't know those things. I know that we're just trying to make sure we get it obligated to Pacific states so that we don't run the risk of losing money for Washington residents.
Yeah, I appreciate that. However, so far it's been 14 months since the congressional enabling legislation and then distribution, and it looks to be longer than that in the end. But anyway, and then the other question just was, you identified or you mentioned differences between round one and round two. I just wondered what catalog of those differences there might be, because I'm not completely sure I understood those.
Yeah, so the one that we've spoken about most readily tonight is the residency language. We'll certainly clarify that. Bob just talked about the cash accounting versus accrual for the 35% loss in Fishers. I know that we've got some other clarifying language. I'm at a loss right now for what those actually are. I don't have a list of those in front of me, but Corey or Megan, if you have things that are relevant to the question and that would, the bigger group would benefit from, please. I'll take that as a yes. Thank you, Corey.
Yeah, I don't have looking for my notes here. But just an example is one Ron just spoke to in answering Bob about the cash versus accrual. They're kind of just more clarification things. Found some notes like some Alaska permits, the direct market permit we didn't explicitly call out, which is basically a limited fish sellers endorsement, but from Alaska. So it's just little clarifying things. Well, maybe not little to some people, but they don't change the framework of the plan. They're of the clarifying type. Yeah, and the residency, getting more precise about the definition of residency, as Ron mentioned, is one thing all the West Coast and Alaska spend plans will likely be doing. But I believe that's what Ron, you were referring to, that type of change.
Okay,
Megan,
that's fine.
Did you have anything?
I think, well, one other thing that we've flagged as a lesson learned or that we didn't consider previously is the subject of growing businesses and how to factor that in. And so we're taking that into account and brainstorming around ways in which we can reflect that caveat in the next spend plan.
Thanks, Megan.
Okay, thank you.
You bet, Larry. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. I'm not, oh, okay, it looks like next we have Randy Leto. Randy, you've been unmuted.
Hello, I was kind of wondering if there's going to be any talk about extra compensation for the North Coast charter and commercial fishermen who are still dealing with the tribal ports being shut down. And like my cost of operation has doubled since having to fish out of CQ.
Hi, Randy. How are you?
Not bad.
Good. Hey, thanks for the question. I don't have a way to crystal ball whether there'll be additional funds. I'm not hearing of any. I think this is the avenue in which you try to apply and seek assistance because of those additional costs due to COVID and the regulatory restrictions that the tribes put into place on their reservations to protect members. So I know that that was a big cost, long runs from the strait or from Westport, that's to get to area 3 and 4. So I just don't know of another possible relief package that might be coming that would specifically look at that, or secondarily, other than like the infrastructure things that we're hearing about from a federal perspective, haven't heard of additional assistance due to COVID that they're considering at this time.
Thanks, Randy. I don't see any additional raised hands at this point. As a reminder for folks, if you'd like to share a question or comment, you can use the raise hand feature on the computer or press *9 on the phone. Ron, it doesn't look like we have any additional questions coming in at this point.
Okay, and Aaron, can you let me know how many, have we seen a dramatic drop off in participants?
We're sitting at about 20 folks right now.
Oh, okay, is that, I did not monitor the level of participants. Is that still most of the people that were on, or have we had a drop off?
Yeah, that's many of the participants that we've had, although we have had some drop off.
Great. Well, maybe I'll bring this to a close, not having additional hands up. Would like to thank everybody for jumping on, sharing concerns. I'd like to thank those who represent their guide businesses and guide associations that jumped on. We will get the word if the director or anyone else changes direction in what we do from this point relative to those who could apply. And for the rest of the folks, thank you very much for the detailed questions and comments that you had. It was a benefit for us. I hope it was a benefit for all those out there. I believe that, Paul, we owe you a response, and I'll get your contact info from Kelly Cunningham and get you information on the definitions of charters and guides. So that you have that.
Ron, sorry to interrupt. If we have time, I do see one additional question in the
Yeah.
attendee list.
We have time. Yeah.
Okay,
please.
perfect. So McDonald Molluska, you've been unmuted.
Good evening.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
I just want to make a comment on the round one and round two. My business is somewhat, it's aquaculture, so my flow is pretty steady. I can control it, unlike the fisheries people out there in the middle of the ocean. But as far as equity is concerned, I would like to see, since you're focusing on that, if you would stay with as much as you can the original plan, because you split the months for whatever reason, asymmetrically included July, so we're into 5 months. And if I remember it, it was 50 million first round and 40 million in the second. Is that true?
That is true.
Okay, so if you're only gonna meet out 10 cents on the dollar or 20 cents on the dollar, whatever it is, if that would come out at the same rate, irregardless of the let's say unequal nature of our business, I would think that would be fair to everyone, because you cannot guarantee any more money. Congress might appropriate more, we don't know. If it all comes out more evenly, then I would say your job's better, and then our predictability on what's going to happen is also improved. Any comments on that?
No, other than we do plan on looking at how we have prescribed the reductions and the proportional assignment. If we have large requests or over the total amount allocated, and we'll take that under advisement. And if we can see something, that the difficulty we'll have is we won't know exactly how round one worked, but we made assumptions with a spend plan for round one. We could certainly make some assumptions for round two to get towards something like that, but we'll definitely look at that. Stay tuned when you see the spend plan as it comes out after it's approved, hopefully by the end of July.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much.
It looks like we have a couple additional questions here.
Okay.
Next up, we have Bob. Bob, you've been unmuted.
Hi, Bob.
Hey, thanks, Ron. Sorry if I felt like maybe I was a little animated on the last time go around, but
no worries, man. You were fine.
You know, when you talk about this, when you look at the guide industry, I'll be honest with you, there's probably a very large portion of the guide industry that probably wouldn't even would even qualify for this particular CARES Act. And even a better portion of them probably won't even apply. And I don't think that's near the issue for most of the guides, is more just the issue that they see they're not being included. And I think that's where a lot of them are at. They see themselves the same as a charter boat industry. And so they just want to be included, and they want to be able to try. And that's where you're getting the majority of the phone calls I'm getting, and the majority of things I'm getting is that they want to be included, and they would like to see the department fight for them as well as they fight for the rest of this stuff. So that's just some thoughts for you, just to know if you take this to the director or to whoever. But for the most part, they just want to be included because they feel like they're not being included, and they feel like they're just as capable or qualified just as much as the rest of these organizations do.
Yep.
So.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate those comments, and I appreciated your first comments as well. We certainly don't view industries with higher priority than others have a strong value for guides and charters within the state of Washington. And again, I will be briefing the director and others on how this meeting went. And if something changes, I'll give you a buzz.
All right, thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you.
Yep.
Aaron, do we have more?
Now we just have Jason. Jason, you've been unmuted.
Hey, Jason.
Hey, I've already spoken to you once about this and you've kind of touched on it a couple times now. I was just going to make the concrete suggestion to maybe look at increasing the marginal rates for the higher brackets in an effort to reduce the burden that the proportional scaling places on smaller businesses.
Okay. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate that.
It looks like that's all the questions and comments at this time.
Okay. Well, again, everyone, thank you very much for sticking with us for almost the whole 2 hours. Lots of great questions. I hope we answered the questions to your satisfaction, or well, we certainly tried to. And we do have some follow-ups. We'll commit to doing that. And again, thank you for sharing your time with us this evening. We really appreciate it. I know that the recording will be posted where, Aaron?
It'll be up on our YouTube page.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thanks, everybody. Have a pleasant evening.